What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moan Inc. If you guys are new here, well then, hello. My name is Erica, and it is lovely to have you joining us today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, I am interviewing yet another author. Except this time, I'm interviewing an author of Mafia romance books. I know. Okay, that's a bit of an oddball for this channel. However, the author that I'm speaking to today wrote the Monsters and Muses series, which is a Mafia romance series that actually infuses each story with Greek mythology. So even though a lot of them, there are 6 books in this series, a lot of them are not direct retellings, they are all infused with Greek mythology, and they are all using the themes, the questions, maybe the framework of individual myths in order to tell these tales. Now, something I always say on this channel is that I love and appreciate anybody getting creative with the Greek myths, and this author is certainly no exception. Which means that today, I am chatting to the one and the only Sav R. Miller. So you guys have probably seen at least the first book of the Monsters and Muses series, which is sitting right behind me, titled Promises and Pomegranates, because these books have taken off on social media. I mean, they are so unbelievably popular. It seems like I cannot go on TikTok without seeing someone talking about them, someone who's either really into Greek mythology or really into Mafia romance. You know, I've seen so many reviews and so many raving reviews about this series. And so when I read them, I knew that I was going to have to bring Sav on for a chat. Now, I just want you guys to know that Sav is not a classicist, so this talk is not going to be really getting bogged down in the source material. I'm really curious about the creative aspect that comes with writing books like this and how to do it successfully. So that's kind of where I want to go with this, Sav, just so that you know. But the way that I start all of these calls and all of these chats, whether it's a professor or another author or whoever it happens to be, is by having you kind of introduce yourself via context. So normally I ask people, you know, where did your classics journey start? Or where did your writing journey start? However, with you, I ended up listening to a podcast where you had mentioned that you had discovered Greek mythology in the 7th grade. And I was really taken by this idea of a young Sav R. Miller discovering Greek mythology and then harboring it for so many years until you ended up writing, you know, Promises and Pomegranates, Vipers and Virtuosos, and so on and so forth. So for the context question, can you take us back to 7th grade Sav? Can we start there? And, you know, what were the things that were impacting her life? How did she discover any of the Greek myths? You know, I don't even know which ones you first discovered, but how did you read about them? How were you introduced to them? And how did it end up with then Monsters and Muses coming out?
Yeah. So it's so funny because so much of my childhood has either been like completely forgotten for some reason, or like the details are just so muddy that like I don't spend a lot of time thinking about anything that happened like beyond a certain point. And that could be, you know, mental illness, that could be I don't know what it is exactly. I just know that like even I don't know, even like early adulthood is kind of like it's just all kind of a blur. But for some reason, 7th grade is like very clear in my head. And that specific unit that we did, because I mean, we did all kinds of stuff. Like we started 7th grade social studies talking about like Mesopotamia and stuff like that. So I mean, we started ancient. And everything else that we kind of talked about in that class, I don't remember like anything about. And for whatever reason, I remember we started the Greek mythology unit or the ancient Greece unit. And I think it focused more heavily on the mythology part for some reason. I don't know if my teacher thought that was the more interesting part for, you know, a bunch of 12-year-olds, or if like that was just how it kind of happened, or if that's just how I'm remembering it. And it's totally possible that that's the only part I cared about. But we started a unit about it, and for whatever reason, the 12 Olympian gods were so interesting to me. And like we did this unit where we drew the different gods and goddesses out of like a hat or something, or a plate. And she had us draw stuff. Like we had to research them and find out the stuff that like their symbols, their animals, the stuff that they were I guess lording over kind of. And we had to draw stuff based on that. And I remember actually the first one that I got was Hestia. And but for some reason she seemed boring to me. But when I was like, you know, when I was 12,
oh my God, my heart.
I have changed my tune since then. But like, when I looked her up, I feel like there just wasn't that much, I guess, mythology behind her. Or
well, you're not wrong. There isn't any. So
right. So I drew again, and I got Hera instead, and I thought she was more interesting, I guess. So I kept her. And then I don't remember where we went exactly from that, but I know we ended up reading The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson, the first book in that series. And I absolutely was enthralled by the book. I like it just kept spurring on this love of it. And I grew up in a super conservative religious Christian household. And in middle school, I had discovered a love for reading and fiction and writing and stuff in elementary school. But it really came to like a turning point in middle school, because I would write in my notebooks stories that I would just come up with, and would have my friends read it. And like, it was usually only like a couple chapters. They would read stuff, and then I'd be like, okay, I have something else that I want to write. So these stories were never getting finished, and they would get, you know, mad at me and stuff. But so I was writing the fiction, and I was discovering a whole new world, because the middle school library had all kinds of different stuff in it. And I was discovering fantasy, because I had read stuff like Magic Treehouse, Peg Carrot books, stuff like that, which I guess isn't really fantasy, but her books were kind of traumatizing for me to be reading in fourth grade. Now that I've gone back and looked, and I'm like, oh my God, like some of these premises are chilling for like a 8-year-old to be reading. So I was discovering a whole new world of books, and with The Lightning Thief, it just really clicked with me. And my parents did not like any of the interest that I had in Greek mythology whatsoever. And again, like that, I was not allowed to read Harry Potter. I wasn't allowed to read Twilight. I read Twilight anyway because I loved vampires, and that was just not ever going to change. And I think 7th and 8th grade, I got my hands on as many vampire books as I possibly could, because that was like the big surge in like vampire literature. And so, yeah, and I think their aversion to the Greek mythology really kind of egged me on, because that was a pivotal time in my development as a child, where I was, you know, not necessarily looking for ways to rebel, but I was coming away from the stuff that I had been brought up learning in church and stuff like that. And I was really pulling away from it. And so my interests were taking me in a completely different direction, and they didn't like it, but I liked it, and it just really stuck. And I don't know when I did this, but there was actually a time where I was so into like just reading stuff on the internet about Greek mythology and about the gods and the goddesses. And I actually found this lockbox when I was moving out of my house, where I had printed out these descriptions and this stuff about the Olympians, and I had cut them out and just kept them in this lockbox. I was like, I don't understand what the purpose of this was, but like it was so funny that like it was it was locked, and it was, you know, hidden in my closet all these years. And yeah, I just from there.
I wanted to ask you about this lockbox, actually. Like, I heard about it in, I can't remember the podcast, but I was listening to another podcast, and you had mentioned the lockbox and then like brushed over it. And I was like, what? Like, what's happening there?
The clippings were in there. They were, they were probably the least like teenage girl-ish, I think, because the other stuff that I had hidden in there were like magazine posters of like Zac Efron and people growing up that I had just hidden. And I think it was just like this little, I had two of them, and I don't remember what was in the other one, but it was just this little like safe box that I had the key. My parents didn't know where it was, and I could keep this stuff that I was interested in separate from them, and I wouldn't necessarily be like berated for it, like made fun of. Like, you know, parents make fun of their kids when they are like in love with celebrities and stuff like that. And and then me getting in trouble for like being interested in Greek mythology. So I just kept it hidden away, and I completely forgot about it until I moved out.
So coming to your Monsters and Muses series, since we're here to discuss that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do have some specifics about characters. So this question is just genre based.
Okay.
When was the moment that you realized Greek mythology was going to work with Mafia romance?
So I wrote Promises and Pomegranates has a prequel called Sweet Sin, and
I have it.
Yeah,
this is it,
super,
guys.
Yes, super short, super compared to everything else that I have written is super short. And I wrote it for actually just a Mafia Christmas anthology, and I wrote that in 2020, so it was almost like a full year before I even published Promises and Pomegranates. But when I was, and this is just like how my brain works, and especially with when I'm crafting stories, is just I was looking for something I think that I could base, I don't know, like just have like a starting point to kind of jump off of. And I had this character Cal, who was from this series that I had already started, I think I was 2 books into publishing it. And I knew that he was going to eventually get a book. And so I wanted to use that character for that book, because the second that it kind of, I think I was filling out his character profile and also just working, like my brain going like in a million miles or a million different directions, is that like I was researching Hades and Persephone and all these kinds of different mythological figures. And I remember reading something about like Hades having this reputation for being terrible or villainous or whatever. And in reality, he was kind of just like a neutral being. And, you know, he was an impartial judge. He wasn't necessarily like malicious. So when I was crafting Cal's character, it just kind of clicked in my head that I was like, okay, if I was going to write a modern day Hades, I think Cal's character would be a fantastic like vessel to be that. And I didn't write Sweet Sin to be like an actual retelling. Like it doesn't really play into the myth as much as I wrote Promises of Pomegranates does. But I did have it kind of in the back of my head when I was writing it, that I was like, you know, I want these characters to kind of embody what I am seeing that Hades and Persephone would have embodied. So yeah, that was how I started with it. And then I didn't know if I was going to do anything with the anthology piece, just because it was so different from what I ended up writing with Promises. And because I had initially planned on Cal's book being the last book in my previous series, but then when I had like started actually thinking about him and plotting that book and the love story, it kind of clicked in my head that I was like, okay, this is not going to work in the framework of the previous series. I want it to be this. And then what really solidified me doing what I did with the Monsters and Muses books was when Riley from Vipers and Virtuosos, which is the second book, she is the sister of the main male character from the previous series, and he's the last book in that series. And as soon as I started writing her, and like she has this fascination with this rock star, and for whatever reason it like flared in my head, and I was like, this would be the perfect opportunity to use the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And as soon as that kind of clicked in my head, I was like, okay, this has to be a series then. Like this has to be a thing. Like this is what I want to do. And I knew that Cal needed his own book. And then I wanted him, because he was such a recurrent and like bold character in those other 3 books, that I wanted him to start the series. I wanted him to have like this, I wanted him to be the jumping off point, because I thought he was going to be this larger than life character that was going to like, you know, start whatever. And so, yeah. And then when I decided to start the new series and started planning the cover, is when it kind of like really came together, I think. That was very long-winded, but
no, I love it. I love all the detail. Keep it all in, always. But when it comes to your first 2 books, like I reviewed them separately on my channel because I just review Greek mythology retellings. And actually, the way that I found your books is because I was doing lots of like secondhand books off of Amazon, and Promises and Pomegranates kept getting recommended. But I don't read Mafia romance. So I was like, why is Amazon spitting this out to me? Like, this is not my genre. And I ended up messaging a friend of mine, and we were going to do a different book review together. And so I was like, oh, do you want to do this book that keeps getting spat out to me, like that's Promises of Pomegranates, whatever? She was like, oh, no, I've already read that one. It's actually weirdly accurate. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so I ordered that one and Vipers and Virtuosos. I don't think I've ever read books faster. Was it out of fear? Was it out of enjoyment? It was kind of both. I'm not going to lie to you. But I was like so surprised that as someone who doesn't read Mafia romance, I was like, these are done in like 6 hours. How did that happen?
Yeah.
But also when it comes to your books, because they're so dark, was there ever a moment that you were like, I don't know if people are going to gravitate towards my Greek myth retellings because you're doing it in such a unique way?
Absolutely. And I cannot tell you how many times I would talk to my best friend, Emily McIntyre, who does fairy tale reimaginings, dark, like villain gets the girl kind of stuff. And in the months, because we published our first, like, she published her Peter Pan reimagining where Hook gets the girl a month after I published Promises and Pomegranates. So we were kind of like going through this experience in the same timeline. And in the months leading up to me publishing Promises and Pomegranates, like we went back and forth all over like, is this too dark? Is it not dark enough? Are people gonna buy that it's a Hades and retelling, or Hades and Persephone retelling? Should I even call it that? Should I call it something else? Like, I'm looking for a different word to call it. Like, I don't know, because when I wrote it, I structured it specifically to fit the framework of, and not necessarily the one like most popular myth. I drew in from a bunch of different, because I mean there's all kinds of like different origins or different versions of, you know, the myth. So it's harder to do a singular concrete thing unless you're like doing like if you did the Odyssey or something that's like super long and super detailed. But I specifically, I mean, I was lining up like plot points, the climax of the story, the fallout, everything. I wanted it all to match, because in my head that was what a retelling was. And it didn't, like, retelling didn't mean necessarily just using the names. It was, you know, retelling a very classic story in a different way. And that was, you know, so when I marketed it before I published, that was what I called it. I called it a Hades and Persephone retelling. And not only did I do that, but I did not know that the Hades and Persephone market was, I didn't know it existed. Because at that point, the only, I think, Hades and Persephone retellings or stories that I had read, were Lore Olympus, and which was my first ever webtoon. And I think I'd read it like a few years before I even like started writing my own stuff. And I had not, I don't think I'd fully read this, whatever books that she had out at the time, but Scarlett St. Clair's Hades and Persephone, A Touch of Darkness, I don't know. I did not realize that the market existed. So when I started marketing that book, I was like tapping into, and it started picking up traction. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know, am I doing this right? Are people going to be mad? And yes. To both, like it's kind of split down the middle. I did change the way that I ended up marketing it after publishing because, I didn't want people going in thinking that it was a fantasy book or that it was magic or it was, another a touch of darkness. I wanted people to know what they were getting when they bought the book. So I did change kind of, and I don't remember if the original author note specifically like wrote out like this is not fantasy, it's not historical fiction, it's not, if you're looking for gods and goddesses, this is not that book. But if you want an extended metaphor, kind of, because that was what I was going for, was an extended metaphor of the myth in these two characters and their love story, then keep reading. And if you don't mind blood and, and knives and all that good stuff.
Yeah, that was it. So I was just looking for exactly you'd said, at least in the copies that I have. And this is just Vipers because obviously Promises is sitting behind me.
Yeah.
But you wrote Vipers and Virtuosos is a dark contemporary romance inspired by the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. And then literally in like bold font underneath it, it is not fantasy or a retelling. And what's really funny is that, as you said, like you matched up Promises, and I think Vipers and Virtuosos doesn't get enough credit for literally being beat on beat the Greek myth. And then after that, you got really creative with it. I loved those for those reasons. But the first two were literally lined up. And I, in my reviews, was like, why wouldn't she just say it was a retelling when it clearly is a retelling?
Right. And it was mostly just to keep any kind of, or well, to try to keep as much confusion out of the picking up the book process. And especially because a lot of people were like, Promises and Pomegranates hit brick and mortar stores when it was my first book to do so. So it was in Barnes and Noble and stuff. So people weren't necessarily seeing it being recommended as a Mafia romance online, like on Book Talk or wherever else. They weren't seeing that, they would turn the cover, or they'd look at the cover and think there's a pomegranate on the cover. What are pomegranates associated with? Hades and Persephone. So it was mostly just for me and to, because I don't want anyone reading something that they don't enjoy or that they might not enjoy. So I just wanted to do my part, I guess, to help people read responsibly. Now, whether or not they read the author note, I think a lot of people just skip past it, which in that case, I can't do anything about that. I've fulfilled my end of the deal. But yeah, and it was a very eye-opening experience, I think, to see kind of a lot of people were like, this is the best Hades and Persephone retelling I've ever read. It really did have that retelling feel to it. And then the other half of the people were like, this is not a retelling. Like, it was a Mafia.
I disagree with them. I literally raved about it. I was like, this is actually beat for beat a fantastic retelling. It's incredibly dark. So I was like, asterisk, don't read if you get triggered by whatever. But I think my audience were also really surprised because I do like ancient books on my channel. And then I was like, oh, I read this. This is actually really good. And everyone was like, where did you find that?
I love that though. That is also when I wrote it, because I wanted it to be what it is, and I wanted it to be a retelling. I wanted it to be this Hades and Persephone kind of metaphor. And I wanted it to be its completely own story. But I wanted people from different genres that if you are cool with the content in it, something that you can enjoy regardless of like where. And not everyone does, and that's obviously completely okay. Not everyone's going to like everything that exists in the world, period. But I think, yeah, it's just been really, really fun seeing people who like only read fantasy or who only read, classical fiction or classical lit, come to it and be like, yeah, this is, I didn't hate it.
Well, something that I think you've done so well across the series and like going into your other books, I actually don't have, which one do I not have sitting with me? Souls and Sorrows. My friend, she's borrowing all of them. And so she's currently on Souls and Sorrows, which is why I didn't put them all in the background. So I was like, I don't want it to be obvious that I don't have book 5, but I do have book 6. But you get so creative in meshing the Greek myths with your own stories, your own Mafia romance stories. So you do have a narrative of like, these are the characters, this is what story I'm telling. How can I infuse this with the Greek myth? And I think now, because so many retellings, like traditional retellings, are coming out, people are always asking me, you know, like, well, how can we make this creative though, if it has to be accurate and blah, blah. And I just think that you're the queen of this. So, like, how do you, when you're structuring these books, how do you make that balance? Like, how do you figure, okay, this is my story, here's where the Greek myth comes into it? Like, how do you structure that?
I try to make it as organic as possible. And it kind of helps because for the Monsters and Muses series, at least, I was not a plotter like at all. So I would just let the character, like I'd fill out these really super detailed character profiles, and then I would kind of get the vibe of the characters and see where I was interested in going with the myth. And a lot of the times, like, I didn't know, I think, what Oaths and Omissions was going to be kind of inspired by. And I didn't even know, like, I knew Jonas was going to get a book. I just didn't know who he was going to be paired up with. And part of the fun part of like not plotting, I think, was that if I wanted to, I could add new characters. I could throw in new settings, new whatever, and like bend it to make it like work with whatever I needed it to work with. So yeah, and it's so much fun to like sit down and like do so much research on these myths or the mythological figures, because sometimes I would start with like an actual, like just a figure, and have to like find a myth out of that, which is what I did with book 6, actually, in that like I knew I really wanted to do Narcissus and Echo. And as I was researching that myth, Narcissus was not fitting where I wanted him to fit. So I ended up stumbling upon Pan and Echo. And it was like a very brief, like hardly anything really exists that I could pull from. So it was like, I'm literally me going off of like 3 sentences, or like not even like necessarily direct sentences, but it would be like very vague stuff about them. So, but then if it didn't have a ton of substance for the romance that I was looking for, then I could base it more on on Pan and Echo separately, like on their mythology. And so I would like pull traits from them, or backgrounds, like who their parents were, stuff like that, or like other mythologies that they had that maybe didn't overlap with the 2 characters that I wanted them to overlap. But like I wanted to pull as much influence from the source that I could. And Liars actually ended up being really fun to write, just because it was very, Pan is rustic. It was very secluded. Like the character in that book is Grayson, and he lives in this mountain estate. Like he's completely secluded. Like it was just very, very, I don't have a better word to use than rustic, but that that was like the thing that kept like going off in my head when I was creating his character, was like I just wanted it to be very rustic and very natural, like as far as nature. Like he was in tune with the mountains and the lake. Like I just wanted it to be very atmospheric, I guess. And because I just felt like those 2 characters kind of embodied that. So and it's not always easy, obviously, like if there's nothing really to go on, then. And also Pan and Echo is not a popular myth, which is like probably because there's nothing to go off. So marketing that becomes a little bit, because like people would stop and be like, who are these? Who is Pan and Echo? Like I know Narcissus, but like Pan and Echo, I've never heard of them. So and it was kind of the same when I did Apollo and Daphne. Like I think a lot of people were expecting just more popular I can't even think of any that Apollo is like any of his romantic entanglements at the moment, but like
Hyacinthus.
that's okay. That's what I was thinking. And I feel like people were expecting those kind of just the more popular stuff. But yeah, the balance was mostly just like if the characters have these traits and I find someone who kind of seems to have these traits or has this hobby, like Aiden was a rock star. He's supposed to be like prolific in music. Orpheus is obviously, you know, I don't know what they called him, the best musician, or I don't even remember. It's been so long since I like looked it up, so I'm like I should have brushed up before I did this.
No, I mean you're not wrong with that.
But yeah, and then once I had the characters down, I could like sit there and look at the myth and kind of highlight plot points that I am either trying to hit specific, like with Promises and Pomegranates or Vipers. And also I did more so with Souls because those have they just have more. So like I can sit down and like pick them apart and like place this action at this time and this at this, you know. So yeah, that was pretty much just how I structured them. And the only one that doesn't hit as I pulled inspiration still from it, but it came, I think, more in like symbolic stuff was with Oaths and Omissions.
Well, speaking of oaths and omissions, something that I remember that you said in an interview, and the reason why I say speaking of oaths and omissions, because that's book number 3, for you guys who don't know. You don't have to read them in order. I do just want everyone to know this. You probably should because all the characters kind of pop up in that order, but they are standalone books, so you can read them out of order if you so please. But Oaths and Omission is book 3, and you've previously said that this series was only planned to be 3 books. Mm-hmm. So was that books 1 to 3, or like was, you know, I don't know, was, or maybe the last one, Lies and Liaisons, was that actually book 3, or like what was the original order, or was it how we see it?
It's actually funny because so the characters in Liars and Liaisons, the 2 main characters, are actually characters that existed before I wrote any of the books I have currently published. I wrote right before the pandemic hit, I wrote a book that was completely different genre. It was just, I mean, not completely different. It was still romance, but it was like contemporary. There was no mafia. There was no darkness to it, really. It was just angsty contemporary. And I have since unpublished it just because it doesn't really fit my brand anymore. And if I ever republish it, I would really want to tweak it a lot to fit more in with what I kind of do now. It was just written so differently, and it was all from the female main character's perspective. Well, most of it was. But the 2 main characters from Liars and Liaisons existed in that world. And Cal he did too, or would have if I had written, they were supposed to be the second book in that series. And Cal was Violet's brother. And I knew that eventually it would be getting darker as I went on because he existed and because he was immediately just a dark character who was literally stalking his half sister. And I put a pause on that book. I think I had half of it written when I decided to write the first book in my King's Trace Anti-Heroes series. And I never went back to it, but I knew that I wanted Violet and Grayson to have a book eventually. I just didn't know where it was going to fit in. And so when I wrote Cal's book, I was like, okay, well, they're brother and sister. Like I can't change that at this point in time. Like that's set in stone. I don't want to change it. Like their bond or whatever I was creating in my head, I wanted it to be there. And so I knew when I wrote Promises and Pomegranates and I included her, I knew she was going to get a book. And I didn't know where it was going to be necessarily. But I think, planned on hers to be the last book in the series. So when I just had the 3 that I was planning, that was what I was going to that was originally going to be, it was going to be Violet. But I was not sure if I was going to be able to write Grayson in because he was so different from what Promises and Pomegranates ended up being. And I didn't know how the Grayson that I had originally written and originally crafted, I didn't know how he was going to come into the story. So then I played around with the idea because when I wrote Promises and Pomegranates, Jonas jumped out at me. And I was like, okay, this character is like screaming kind of that he has more to talk about. He has a story that he would like me to tell. And so that I flirted the idea of putting him and Violet together. And my best friend, because the half-written book from however long ago was the first of mine that she had read. And so that Grayson character was the first one that she fell in love with of mine, because she was also my critique partner. And she was very adamant that he get a book. And I was kind of explaining to her my thought process of like, what if I put Jonas and Violet together? And she's like, I'll deal with it, but I'll be upset if Violet and Grayson don't end up together. So then I think as I was plotting Oaths and Omissions, I had this other character named Lenny Primrose that I had planned for a completely different book, completely different series, completely different world. And as I was looking at her, I was like, she might actually make a really good addition to this story or this world. And I just shoved them together and, played around with that, and it worked out beautifully. So
Grayson, though, speaking of lies and liaisons, it's so funny, like going through this series again, like I said, because I'm a baby. I have been terrified whilst reading all of your books. Again, I'm like a little child that just exists in ancient Greece. And so when I read everything else, I'm like, what's happening in the world today? Like, what's going on? But when it came to Lies and Liaisons, this was the only one of your series where the whole time I was rooting for Grayson and I was like, Violet is bad news. I was like, you need to stay away from her. We need to protect you at all costs because you've had a really tough time. Whereas normally, when reading like Vipers and Virtuosos, I was like, okay, Riley's done the most to get away from this man, and yet he still finds her. Is she okay? She's kind of into this. I'm really worried. I'm going to call the police. Grayson was the only man that I wasn't initially scared of. Like, I think you balance this, like, I don't want to say gentle giant, but that's like the phrase that comes to mind, that he's like this huge guy that has this really scary front, but is this like classical musician. And I'm like, what was he always that way?
No. Well, he was always very, 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 very rough around the edges. He very much has had this like warm, gooey center, but like did not want to let anybody in. He cared very much for in his original tale. He cared very much for his siblings, and that was it. And he loved his mom too. And that was it. And he was super attracted to Violet, wanted her really badly, but I think was just terrified of her because she, at least in her original, and I don't know how much it really came through when I ended up writing Liars, but she was just like this kind of force that like saw him, I think, for, what he was instead of what he was performing as. And it terrified him, and she wanted him, I think, to be better. And I don't think that not necessarily that he didn't want to be, but that he didn't know if he was capable, I guess. He initially was, instead of being from a musical dynasty family, he was from a family that had like a literary empire. So I still kept it in like the arts, the creative space.
So is that for the whole family? Like, were they all part of this literary thing, or was this just Grayson?
No, they were all part of it.
What? That would have changed the story so much.
Yep. And it was it was very, very, I went back and forth on his character when I was recrafting it because I didn't want to change him, but like some stuff had to be kind of altered in order to fit into what I had created with the Monsters and Muses world. So I didn't want to completely redo an entire character. Because he was this very, very loud character who'd been very patient for, I guess, almost 3 years, and was just like waiting for me to write him. And so I didn't want to just scrap him. I wanted to write his story, but some stuff it just had to be changed. So, and it was just like little, like obviously, instead of books and literary, they went to music. Other than that, I mean, a lot of his stuff, like personality wise, it stayed very similar. And in the original book that I had half written, I still had him living out in the woods by himself, like in a creepy cabin that he was gonna make Violet stay with him at. Like most of that actually stayed pretty much the same. But yeah, it was just little things as far as like his background and like familial makeup and stuff like that that had to be altered just a little bit to fit my narrative.
Well, with all these characters, something that you said in an interview that you glossed over and the interviewer glossed over, and I was like, I definitely want to pick that up. That you say when you write your books, you, and I quote you when I say this, you method write.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, can you elaborate on what that is? Just because when you talk about these dark characters, I'm like, what does method writing mean?
So I'm not going out and like committing crimes or anything like that, but the characters become such an integral part of my mind that in order for me to be able to write, like, period, I am writing as if I am writing from their own stream of consciousness. I'm sorry, I have a dog crying because she wants my lap. So yeah, what I call it method writing, because like when I'm writing a book, and especially depending on where I'm at in like my deadline process, I am thinking constantly as in their head, if that makes sense. So like I'm driving down the road, I'm paying attention to like driving, but my mind is like elsewhere. Like it's kind of split down the middle depending on the action that I'm doing. But like I'm thinking about situations that there's constantly, or I'm rehearsing kind of like conversations that they would have with family members or their romantic interests and stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of like I'm living or seeing through their heads, I guess. Not necessarily that I'm like acting out any of the stuff that they're doing, or like, I'm not, when it comes to like spice, I'm not researching and putting myself in these positions, but it is very much just I'm trying to think and feel and really live through the characters so that they come alive on the page.
Were there any scenes in particular that you were writing with, speaking of questionable behavior, that took you by surprise?
Usually for me, it's a spicy scene. So like the lotion scene in Vipers and Virtuosos.
God. God.
I know I wrote that, and as soon as I wrote it, I think I like went to my best friend and I was like, this one, a lot of people are not gonna like this. I was like, I think this was a little bit crossing a line there, but yeah. And that's another thing with kind of the method acting, is that like I'm not in charge of what the characters are doing or saying or like their acts. Like I want them to completely drive the story. So like Aiden specifically was the one that was kind of irritating me when I was writing him, because I was planning a bully romance, and it is to a degree. But I wanted him to be really, really horrible to her. And in a lot of like the areas where I was like, okay, you could really push this, or you could really make her hate, everything, like make her hate her entire life, stuff like that. He wouldn't do it. So like I was after Promises and Pomegranates, I was like, I really like degradation. It's really fun to write. I really like exploring the dynamic of like what is degrading to an attractive degree or like an alluring degree, and what kind of crosses the line. And he just wanted to praise Riley most of the time. And I'm like, okay, I'd never written praise really. So I was like, okay, whatever, I guess. So yeah, the lotion scene in Vipers, and I think also in Liars, what scene was it it was also a spicy scene, but it wasn't necessarily like, it's kind of just icky. There's a scene where it's a spicy scene where Grayson and Violet are in the car after they have gone to, I think, that university, and he's on the phone with his dad, and things heat up there, and like he finishes, and I think it goes like everywhere, and like gets on his phone, and he makes her lick it off. And I remember stopping and going, and I was like, oh my God. I had to stop and like stare at the wall for a minute, because I'm like, what did I just write?
But that reminds me of a scene in Souls and Sorrows when you wrote that they were like on the business meeting like call. And I remember actively reading this and going, did I just miss where they hung up? And then it gets to the end and the person's like, oh, I can see you're busy. I'm like, why wouldn't you hang up? Like, oh my God.
I think it's one of those things where it's like, is this really happening? Right? Like, I don't know. Maybe you'll come back and tell me that like you fell or something. I don't know, but
you're like, oh, sorry, all that grunting, I just fell down the stairs. My bad.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is so funny because these scenes are, a lot of the times I can pinpoint the one that's going to be talked about the most. So like the lotion scene, I was dead on with that one. Talked about the most. Promises and Pomegranates, the theater scene, I think is the most talked about. Liars, I thought it was going to be that phone scene. And I swear, I don't think I've seen anyone like hardly mention her licking the phone screen.
I think by now, Sav, we're all so used to it though. We're book 6. Like,
yeah,
if he didn't do that, we'd be like, why aren't you doing that, Grayson? Like,
that is true. Yeah. But the one that ended up being like a really big focal point that kept getting brought up over and over was one that I didn't even remember writing. And like it's this like single line in Grayson's, I think, point of view where he's talking about his family had stayed at the estate or something like that, and he'd fed them dinner the night before, and it was the bone, like he had boiled this person's bones down into a broth and fed that to his family for dinner, like as a soup or whatever. And people like they'll highlight it, and I remember the first time someone sent me a message, I think when ARCs had gone out, and they were like, Sav, the soup. And I was like, what are you talking about? What soup? I'm like, I don't remember writing anything about soup. And they sent me like a screenshot of it, and they were like, oh my God, like just casual cannibalism. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even remember putting that in.
Well, for me, I'll bleep this out because this is a spoiler. I'll just bleep out this one word. But for me, it was, how is it not the thing when Nate's outside the window with that, like that for me, yeah. I literally was reading it and I was like, are you joking? Like, what?
It kicks up and gets really, really dark in the last like 20% there, which was what I wanted it to do, because I wanted the atmospheric, the gothic vibes, but I also wanted kind of spooky, like thriller-ish suspense there at the end. And it was really, really hard for me to write it the way, because I don't like, so it was very, very difficult for me to end that book the way that I ended it. And I think I might have even cried when I wrote that, and maybe not cried, but like got a little bit like emotional when I was writing what was going on before like the bad guys are, taken care of. I'm like, I don't do this.
Like, you even shocked yourself. You're like, what just happened there?
Yeah.
I am just aware that we've been chatting for pretty much exactly an hour in real time, so I should probably start wrapping this up and we can chat more off camera. Sorry guys, you're not invited. But Sav, as a final question to, start winding down, I like to leave everybody with a piece of advice. So obviously throughout these chats, I hope that people get a lot out of them. However, I like to leave them with actually you speaking directly to the audience. Now for you, I think when it comes to your books, you're not a classicist, as we said at the start of this call, and that's okay. And I think that the way you've gone about adapting the Greek myths and, presenting them in your own world, in your own genre, and done with such confidence, I think is so admirable because it works really well. And I think that there are probably a lot of people who are listening to this who have their own creative ideas for the Greek myths, right? Probably not Mafia romance, but maybe in their own genre of something that they have enjoyed reading and they think, oh, maybe this myth would work well there, but they might not have the confidence that you did to actually hit that publish button on their work. So I was wondering, for that person who's been watching this to try and sort of, get a little bit of SAV energy in them, what's a piece of advice that you can give to that specific viewer?
The most important thing for me when I'm writing is I'm trying to write something that I would want to read. So even if there's not a gigantic audience for it, you can do really well with like niche audiences, niche genres, stuff like that. Like obviously no one was asking for a Hades and Persephone mafia romance. But I wanted it. I wanted to write it. I wanted to read it. These characters had a story that I wanted to tell, and it was really, really, really fun to write it and to take that creative license. And I'm not obviously like a classicist or a historian or anything like that. Like, so most of the stuff I was pulling from was stuff that I'm still learning about, or I'm seeking out now, and not stuff that I'm necessarily just like pulling from my the back of my head or whatever. So yeah, I think if you have a story that you want to tell, and I just think just go for it. I mean, like I said, I try to just write the stuff that I would personally enjoy. And I think that if you do that and you're writing stuff that is true to like whatever content or whatever genre you are wanting to write in general, you'll find the audience, or it'll find you, or however that works. I think there is an audience for everything out there. So if you have an idea and you want to write it, and it seems like something that you would enjoy reading or you would enjoy writing in general, then I think just go for it.
What a beautiful note to end on. Sav, thank you so much. I hugely, hugely appreciate the fact that you took any time out of your day to talk with me, let alone an hour, again, in real time. Hopefully I can whittle this down to under an hour, because everything that you said was just so insightful. And I think a lot of people who are just, enthusiasts in Greek mythology are going to get so much out of this chat. So thank you so much for joining me. And obviously, thank all of you guys for actually tuning in, for watching, and for engaging with, in this instance, not only me, but also Sav. Now, it goes without saying, you guys can go into the description and find all of the links to Sav's incredible books and her series. You can also find her social media down there, so her Instagram, her TikTok, and you should definitely go and check her out to stay up to date with all of her new releases. So thank you guys so much, and we'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on Moan Inc. So I'll see you guys then.